What happens if a person's brain sex doesn't match their biologic sex?
ないや、ある。あ
What if that mismatch isn't just for one day or few months, but has been there since birth? It sounds like something from a work of fiction, but for some people, it's reality. In the last episode, we talk about gender identity, gender expression, and biologic sex, which are actually different dimensions. Transgender people are those whose gender identity doesn't align with the biologic sex. Among the current research on the region of transgender identity, one leading hypothesis suggests that difference may begin before birth. It's known as the prenatal hormone theory. The core idea goes like this. During fetal development in the womb, around weeks 8 to 12 of pregnancy, the genitals begin to form and differentiate along male or female. Gender identity, however, is thought to be more closely tied to brain development. The sex-related structures of brain developed mainly during the middle and later stage of pregnancy, shaped by the prenatal hormonal environment. But the timing and mechanisms are not synchronized with genital development. This raises a fascinating question. If these two things are independent, why do we still use the same categories we talk about gender identity as we do for biologic sex? Why do the words man and woman describe both your body and your identity and your expression? Here's the first thing worth noticing. What we call biologic sex has never been a purely biologic description. Look at the earliest cave paintings, the earliest human sculptures. How did humans distinguish the sexes? By the genitals. In other words, by reproductive function. But reproduction for humans has never been just a biologic event. Humans are the only full bipedal primates. Our birth canals are narrow. Our infants are extraordinarily fragile at birth, and they require enormous maternal investment, make it hard for mothers to range far. This set us apart from many other animals, whose young can run and jump shortly after birth without disrupting the mother's foraging. These species don't lead to organized division of labor around reproduction, but humans do. Raising a child requires group cooperation. So around the simple question of who can give birth, cooperation, division of labor, and the social roles naturally took shape. You could say reproduction became one of the founding forces of human society itself. From the very moment biologic sex was named, it was already a social concept. Biologic sex itself gave rise to a corresponding social division of labor between the sexes. At this point, many of you are probably thinking of one name in particular, Judith Butler. Judith Butler is a professor at UC Berkeley, described by the New York Times as one of the most influential gender theorists of our time. Most people know her through her 1990 book Gender Trouble, and through the theory she introduced here, gender performativity. Gender Trouble has sold over 100,000 copies worldwide and has been translated into more than 20 languages. Time, The New Yorker, and The Guardian have all run major profiles of her. In Western feminist, LGBTQ+, and anti-war movements, she stands as one of the most iconic public intellectuals of her generation, but she is also one of the most revered scholars among Western conservatives. In 2017, when she gave the lecture in Brazil, protesters burned her effigy in the street. Why would a philosopher who studies gender provoke such a reaction? The answer starts with the gender trouble. Put simply, Butler argues that gender is not some inner thing you were born with and then express outwardly. We usually assume there is a self first, and that self is either male or female, and this is why we behave in masculine or feminine ways. Butler completely flips this order. She says there is no self that exists prior to behavior. In her own words from Gender Trouble, there's no gender identity behind the expression of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expression that are said to be its result. It is opposite of what we assume. It's the daily repeating of certain gestures, certain postures, certain ways of speaking. That is the repeating itself that produces the feelings of having an inner gender. Take an example. A little girl is taught from childhood to be gentle, to be delicate, how she speaks, how she dresses. After 10 or 12 years of this, she feels this is just my femininity. It comes from deep inside me. But Butler would say, no, you've got the order backwards. It's not I do these things because I'm a woman. It's I've done these things over and over. And that repetition has produced that feeling that I'm a woman. So your gender expression and gender identity are both shaped within a set of social norms. But here's the key. Each of us is both a product of these norms and a participant in producing them. We naturally hold different expectations for how women and men would dress and behave. This is why we have the terms like masculine style or Lolita style. As members of society, we are constantly creating and using language that draws gender lines. And crucially, because gender identity shapes gender expression, I think of myself as a woman, therefore I tend to wear women clothing. Transgender people end up looking out of place within this rigid. This is why in Gender Trouble, Bonner challenges traditional notions of gender identity. She wants people to break free from social constraint and search for a more authentic self. But this raises an obvious question. If gender is just a product of repeated performance, then where does the inner voice that many transgender people describe come from? Many transgender people say, I've always had a voice inside telling me I'm not what my body appears to be. There's a famous case worth knowing here, David Reimer. He was born a healthy male, but in infancy, a botched circumcision destroyed his penis. The sexologist John Morley advised his parents to raise him as a girl. They had him surgically reassigned, and at puberty, he was given estrogen. Morley believed gender was entirely a matter of nurture, that with the right environment, the child would identify as female, but the outcome was opposite. David felt profound discomfort throughout his childhood, never identified as a girl. At the moment he learned the truth at 14, he chose to live as a male. The case was often cited to refute pure social constructionism, to say, look, the amount of social shaping can override what seems to be innate. In her later book, Undoing Gender, Butler engaged more directly with the transgender experience. She acknowledges that a person's sense of their own gender is real and undeniable, but she also insists that even the inner feeling emerges from the encounter between your body and the social norms that surround it. So, what does she do with the biologic evidence we mentioned earlier, such as hormones? Bonner doesn't deny these things physically exist. In the book, Bodies That Matter, she clarified that what she questioned isn't the materiality of the body, but the way we categorize the materiality. She argued that very act dividing human bodies into male and female, label some trait masculine and other feminine, is itself a cultural construction. Why is certain testosterone level marked as male range? Who see that threshold? Why is a size difference in certain region of the brain interpreted as male brain versus female brain? These classifications carry social assumptions back into them. Even the language of science is in part a social language. She chose a very broad and deconstructive perspective, and I think it has a point. Take color as an example. In nature, light exists on a continuous spectrum. There are countless shades, but in language, we most say red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Maybe we add words like scarlet, but that doesn't mean nature only contains those colors. It means our minds, our societies need simplification. Perhaps nature or God never created people in two clear labeled boxes, male and female. Each person's hormone level, brain structure, and physical trait are in unique combination. But as a social species, we need language, we need categories, and we need rough labels to organize social life. Perhaps to respect the gender diversity is to admit the language we use to define gender has never fully captured the complexity of the physical world. The categories developed through the evolution are too broad and imperfect. They help us navigate reality, but they were never meant to confine the lives of individual people.